a little mixing node that can combine two signals and make a more complex musical output, or you can use it as a signal generator in its own right, okay? So some things about the module, it's almost done first off, which is great, and then we're gonna have it available as DIY kits through the store here, and there will be a through-hole only kit, so all the SMD will be taken care of for you. And you know, you just put together the headers and the LEDs and the jacks and stuff. And then you can also get an assembled module. One thing that's kind of cool about the modules is, like, since they are based on the same circuit, you can actually change the module from one to another by getting a faceplate, swapping it, and then flashing new firmware. And to make that easier, we have like a dedicated firmware flasher app. So, you know, I think a lot of people are just going to get one and not bother with the firmware change, but if you're really into like customizing it and hacking it, that's totally something that is available. So now let me kind of like talk about the individual modules now. So the one that kind of started it all out is called Meta now. And so the idea with this module is to basically give you something that can play a different role in patch from day to day, right? And so this is going to be kind of coming from the lineage of like the Surge DUSG, or in more modern terms like a Maths or a Tides or something like that, right? Where it can be an audio oscillator one day, or it can be an LFO the next day, okay? And so the whole thing is basically revolving around this idea of having like a couple different operating frequency ranges. So let me go ahead and patch one in, and we can listen to what I'm talking about here. So with the module, if you don't have anything patched into the A and B, the analog inputs, then you've got these two handy reference voltages that basically allow you to set the level of the signal coming out. So I'm going to put them at high noon, which puts the signal at ground, and then I'm going to take the output and patch it through a little mixed attenuation stage, okay? So we start to hear it, and then we can increase the level. All right, so you've got your audio oscillator here, and you've got a coarse tune, you've got a fine tune, and then you've got like a timbre shift, all right? And then one thing that's kind of nifty is these are actually capacitive touch sensors, and so to change sounds, you can just pop up and down. There's like a Vocaloid thing. That's actually samples of like T-Pain and like Future and like other like studio acapellas that were like granularized. And then here's a bunch of recordings of like trains. So it's like train horns. And so, you know, there's 8 sounds per frequency range, or 8 wavetables per frequency range, and they're meant to sort of like match what the module is doing. So you don't have these wiggly audio tables when it's acting as an envelope, for example, okay? So then the other primary parameter of this thing is whether or not it's looping, okay? So there's like these 2 parameters over here that really kind of govern what the module does. So if I disable looping, then, you know, we have ourselves a little kind of like drum synth, right? And so there's a manual trigger there, or we can go ahead and take a trigger from another source, and let me get the VCV rack cranking here. And so now I'm going to just take the Wogglebug clock so we can hear. And so you've got the time of your strike, the pitch, your timbre, and again you can change the sound. This one's for John, it's a gabber kick. And so, faster, right? Yeah, there we go. And so, then there's this trig parameter right here, okay? And so the trig parameter always changes what happens when you give the module a trigger. So in this case, it's going to change sort of your drum model. So this is more like an 808 kind of model with like a smack and then like a decay. This is more like a tom. This is, you just hear the morph, so this is more of like a plucked voice, right? And while we're at it, we should point out that this thing has a 1 volt per octave input, and so we can actually make sort of a musical sequence here. And so it tracks up to, I don't know, theoretically like up to 8 or 10 octaves, like if you get it trimmed right. And we have a little calibration firmware for DIYers to make it easier to trim. And so then you also have voltage control over the decay of the strike. Okay, so let me grab an LFO here, get that from the mix out, pass that into T2. So you can kind of animate your sequence a little bit, okay? And then you also have modulation over the timbral board. And you can use those together in conjunction, right? Now, when the thing is acting as an audio oscillator, I'm going to cheat and use this VIA as a second source down here. You can actually patch through the A and B inputs. And kind of, oh, this one's a bit hard to hear actually. Oh, there we go. And so you get sort of like more of a clangorous, like ring modulation type tone. And then you've got these sample and holds that actually do a sort of interesting, like, it's honestly, it's analog aliasing. Like, it's like resampling with analog sample and holds. And so in simpler terms, it sounds wild. You know, it sounds like crazier, noisier sort of sounds. And so yeah, that's kind of like a flyby of the drum mode. Okay, and then, you know, I'm going to try to not quite get so deep into all the different modes because it can get overwhelming, but like basically these modules are designed to let you go deep. They're supposed to let you do a bunch of different things with the same module because that's just a design principle that we're interested in over at Starling. But at the same time, they're supposed to be intuitive and musical and act more like familiar devices, okay? So, now let's move over to how we might use this in sort of a sub-audio realm. So I'm going to take our audio oscillator that we were using over here, and I'm going to change the frequency mode, okay? So I'll give it one little blip, and then I can tell that I'm in the envelope mode because if you hold a button, the LEDs are going to show you what mode you're in. You take your finger off if you hold it for more than a second and it doesn't change the mode. So that's like a UI thing that all of them share. No levels to the menus whatsoever. You touch a button and it changes the parameter. So now I'm going to plug an audio signal into the B input here, and we're going to see that this becomes a, oh, come on, do what you're supposed to. There we go. So it acts as a integral VCA envelope generator combo. So yet again, something that hopefully is like very useful from patch to patch. So we're going to give that trigger. And one thing you're going to notice here is that the function of these two top knobs changed. So they're not going to follow the knob per function kind of idea. Instead, they're going to change to give you the most suitable control for what the module is doing. So this is the attack time, this is the decay time. Now, trying to keep everything tied together and cohesive, again, the trig parameter changes how this thing behaves to the trigger input. So you've got a couple different re-triggering models. This one is like a hard sync, and so you get those pops. That might not be so useful for this application, and so this one right here is going to be more like a model of a analog attack release envelope, and it's going to give you that. This one actually is gated, so you'll hear it's staying high with the gate. And then this one's kind of interesting. It's actually the pendulum mode, and so every time you hit it, it like changes direction. So you don't need to like remember all those. Like more what you would do is you would patch something into the trig input, and then you would just bop through the options till you hear something that sounds right. Okay, so we can also use this as like a modulation source for something else. So we've got the NLC 329 phaser with the John McCoy special mismatched FETs, so it sounds really gnarly. And we're going to take the main output here and we're going to use that as the frequency modulator, and then we're going to actually patch with this absurdly long cable. We're going to patch through the phaser so we can hear. This one's more correct. Okay. And we need to monitor that, don't we? Okay, so then Okay, cool. So now we see something really useful about these knobs. They basically act as like a built-in attenuverter for the envelope signal. So it starts from A and it goes to B. So when I move B around, that's like turning envelope up, and then this is like turning it down. And you don't need a separate module to do that. It's built into the module, okay? So then you can change the envelope shape, get different kind of articulations, move it around, have a great time. Okay, so now you can also make that loop and have more of like a looping AR kind of dealio without a trigger. Alright, so let's get through this here and cover the last frequency range, which is the complex LFO. So this slows the oscillator way down, but you get these really complex wave shapes that sort of give you lots of like ups and downs within one cycle. And so with this one, again, to suit the mode of operation, you have a cycle time control, and then you have a skew control. So, you know, like on a 4MS like pingable envelope generator, where it goes like from like this to like this, that's what this is. This time 2 is going to do.
What did you say that knob is like a skew?
Skew.
Okay.
Yep. Skew. Exactly. Okay. Now, just real quick, what you can do with this sort of configuration is let's bring back our trusty LFO and let's patch it through the module. So now what you've got is, this is the speed of our other LFO here. And you can combine CV signals together and basically make like a sort of amalgamation of a couple different signals. So that works really great if you've got a few modulation sources and you're like routing them around in your patch, right? So now the sample and holds that I mentioned before, those are especially useful in this circumstance because it like freezes your input and you only hear the contour generator, but then it'll let it go and you'll hear the combination again. So what you can do to make that easier to use is just patch shit through the A and B inputs and then bop through the different sample and hold modes until you hear something that you like. Alright, that is like an overview more or less of the meta module. So just kind of to recap, like this thing is meant to basically span the frequency range from a really slow LFO all the way up to an audio oscillator. It's oversampled, so it sounds pretty decent even at high frequencies. And it sort of shares these common traits, but then it adapts to sort of fit the kind of role that it's sitting in, okay? So that one is, you know, it's a lot like, say, for example, a Tides or a Maths, but like it's implemented from the ground up to basically take advantage of that 2-to-1 crossfader stage right here so that you can use it as a signal source or you can patch stuff through it. All right, so that one is probably the one that's got the most modes, options, but one thing that makes it sort of nice is it's got a preset recall system, okay? So let me make sure the factory presets are loaded up in this thing. Then you can hold the trig button and hit a button and it'll just change to a certain mode of operation that combines all the parameters and you can save your own presets and stuff. So when it ships with the factory presets, it'll basically cover all those different examples that I showed y'all, but it will you know, let you go straight to the option that you want without having to program things. So for people who are put off by all of the menus and stuff, you can just use the presets and basically have like 6 modules in one essentially, and you get to them just by holding a button and touching a sensor, okay? So that's like one of the modules, and we see like it's got its own functionality, it's kind of its own little world of operation. Let's move on to the one that's probably the most similar to this. So this module is called the sync, and it's got a really similar operating principle where it like crossfades between these two inputs, but instead of programming the frequency range into this one, you actually give it a clock and it follows that clock wherever you're going to take it, okay? So I'm going to make this an audio oscillator, and I'm going to plug the square wave out here into the sync, and then we're going to listen to this and check it out. So same kind of dealio, the A and B, they control the sort of range here, turn this up, and there we go. All right, so this thing basically uses a frequency input here. So notice when I change my master around, like that's what changes the pitch. But then I can also change a ratio multiplier. So this one is set up to give you the overtone series and the undertone series. So like this is going to be your sort of like Terry Riley, just intonation world of pitches. And then of course we can give modulation to either of those inputs. Or both. Let's use this for an LFO. And one thing that makes this kind of useful is you can actually get a little signal out here every single time that the ratio changes. So I'm out of envelope generators here, but
There's two,
right, exactly. So you know, if you've got a situation like this where the notes are changing, on every single change of note, like you can signal a event. So let's only scan one here, and then I'll go like this. And now we've got our envelope generator. And you can do this really tricky patch where you actually plug an envelope generator directly into both of the inputs with these really handy high quality Modular Addict stacking cables that we've got over here. So this is what I was talking about by like signaling a change of note, right? So like this is really good for like a self-playing patch because you can just put a modulation signal into one of these two inputs and then hook this up to an envelope or something like that and basically trigger a note event every single time that the ratio changes. So it's an audio source, but it's this sort of strange paradigm of like scanning a grid of just intoned pitches in order to get what you're hoping for here. So there's a couple different groups that give you different sorts of things. So this is like a sort of arpeggio table. And then this is sort of like the chord.
Maybe I'll see you play Super Mario World right now.
You know, so an Atari 2600 would actually take the NTSC clock and it would do subdivisions of it. So like all the sounds from an Atari were actually ratio derived pitches that were like derived from the color clock. And so like that's why this sounds like a video game, is because like early video game synthesis often used ratios because it was cheap. And so you've got like wavetable control here. And then you've actually got some over here that are full 1 volt per octave quantizations. And so if you plug that into something that's a little bit more sane, you'll get basically like a quantization of a just in tone pitch. And we've got some non-traditional options in here too. Let me highlight the Bow and Pierce scales because they actually sound really cool to me. Sweet. So, you know, okay, as you can see, like, I could keep going down a wormhole here with like all the different things that any of these can do, but like, let me try to lay back a little bit so we can cover some more ground. Another really fun way of using this thing is as sort of like a sub-oscillator or like overtone generator. And so I'm going to take an audio source and I'm going to patch it through here. So now we've got an audio source and we're patching it through the module. And this basically creates like a subharmonic oscillator. So. And so then we could take our 1 volt per octave, put it into here. And you can just enhance any old analog oscillator with a wavetable that's a subharmonic. You can crank on that, you can modulate it, and you can do that nifty sample and hold trick. This also locks to the phase. So the easiest way to show that is if anyone can see this VCV rack patch right here, I've got the same kind of configuration, but I've got an XY scope. And so you'll notice that like it's making a shape on the XY scope, and if I move the frequency around, the shape comes back into alignment, and so that's what phase locking is going to do for you. You can also do audio rate phase modulation, or audio rate duty cycle modulation, or audio rate force modulation. So great, lots of fun audio stuff. Now, the other thing that you can do with this is you can use it as an LFO. And so we're going to take a slower clock in here, and we're going to plug it into the sync. And this one, one thing I forgot to mention. These modules have an 8 HP core and then a 4 HP expander. And so this one right here is just the core without the expander. So for the 8 HP heads out there, you can have a nice slim little profile. And what you're losing is you're losing 2 CV attenuators, 1 manual control, an auxiliary logic output, an auxiliary logic input, and a trigger button. And so it's nice to have these for sure. But if you've got a larger system, you might not need that stuff. And so you can get all of the main core functionality and save that 4 HP for something else fun, like a clock divider or something. So now let's set up a fun little patch where we can explore the sound here. So we're going to monitor this, phaser. Why isn't this doing Now this one right here is going to be on the same kind of clock as that other one. Right, we kind of hear how like that's repeating, and it's phase aligned too, which is really nice for a synced LFO. And then this set of ratios is like, if you look at multiples of like 1, 2, and 3, so like ratios that use 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, 12, and 16, and you put those on top of each other, what you find is you get traditional rhythms. And so like this set of ratios is geared towards those. So this is fun for me because I like to make beats and stuff, so this is really, really useful. Okay, so that's an idea of how the sync can be used as an LFO rate thing again. So just trying to keep track here, the thing you should notice is it followed the clock everywhere that it went. When you gave it an LFO clock, it acted like an LFO. When you gave it an audio clock, it acted like an audio oscillator. And then it's got that nifty VIA crossfader configuration that lets you patch stuff through it or use it as a signal source. And then you've got these ratios to give you a frequency that's related to the input clock, but musically, you can give it like musical articulations, okay? So those two are sort of your like jack of all trades signal generators, and they're really good friends. They work well together. And so then let's see here. Moving along, we have a wave shaper in the family that's inspired by local hero Grant Richter's mini wave, which is sort of an unheralded wired module that basically is like a wave train oscillator that uses your other oscillators as the wave train scanner, okay? So like what this thing is it's like a 2-to-1 wave shaper. So we can take our output here, and this one is unique because it doesn't have any kind of oscillator built into it. Like when you don't have anything patched into it, it sits here and does nothing. But then as soon as you put an audio source into the thing, then that's where stuff starts to get more interesting. So let me get this somewhere useful. And okay, so I'll patch into the X input here, and then turn it up. And so what we find is that when you turn this up, you get sort of like wavefoldy type stuff. And then when you move around on your wave train, you sort of accentuate different overtones. And then the actual surface that's being scanned can morph. And then you can scan through a number of different surfaces. And they all have their own character, right? Where this thing gets really interesting is when you actually scan it with two sources. So this is one that has like a kind of cool conceptual framework where it's like you're scanning a 3D space of samples and you can morph stuff, but like frankly this one is one of the easiest ones to just plug stuff into it and play it, you know? It changes the sound, you hit the button, it changes the sound, hit the map button, it changes the sound. You can patch stuff through it. A bonus is using the sync as a second scan. So it gets pretty gnarly when you do something inharmonic. But like when your other scan is like a subharmonic, then it sounds cool. So, recap. The sync is one of the dimensions of the scan, the meta is the other, and so the meta is at the main frequency, and then the sync is at like a subharmonic, and so like, if you look at those on the 2D scope, like this is basically what's scanning around on the wave terrain, and since it's locked into a pattern, you're gonna get a nice periodic waveform as a result. And so long story short, practically, like if you have an oscillator with a triangle and a saw and like another waveform, plug all of those into the scanner, and then you'll basically get this like morphing wavetable that's derived from your basic bread and butter analog oscillator, right? So that's like practically the way to use this thing. Is just take an oscillator, take the different waveform out, patch into the X and Y, and then you can like modulate the Z, and you can actually even, let me see here. Okay, how am I losing so many patches? Okay. Take another signal and patch it through. to mellow it out, just turn the X and Y down. Oh, and then another fun thing is that this thing actually has the ability to be like you can teleport on the space, and so you can like let me find a good gate sequence. And so like basically like you can hit it with a trigger source and it'll change every time it gets triggered. And then there's a couple auxiliary outputs here. Like this one is like more of just the wave folder. So it's like a two-dimensional wave folder. This one is like a logic output. So this is going to be gnarlier. It's like a 1-bit wave terrain. I turn this down for our sake. So for people who like weird sounding stuff, here you go. And then weirder guys, this one I think. Yeah, this one just kind of like comes and fits and stuff. And so this is for like freaky shit. So yeah, that's the scanner. And we're almost there, folks. That's 3 of the 4 vias. And then finally, the last one here is way different than the other ones. So like, you can kind of see some common traits between the meta and the sync and the scanner. Like, they're all basically based around like that VIA crossfader circuit and then a sort of like flexible liquid wavetable playback engine. That's sort of what's going on under the surface. And so they're going to be signal generators, or they're going to shape your other signal generators and make cooler shapes and stuff. Now, finally, the gate sequencer is a totally different ballgame. What we have here is we have essentially 2 intertwined Euclidean sequencers, right? So there's sequencer 1 and then there's sequencer 2. Both of them have CV control, and rather than having like, oh, here's the Euclidean pattern 3/8 or 4/8 or 6/8, like we hand selected rows of patterns, and then you can scan through the rows with the knob. So let me patch this into something that we can hear. We're going to use the meta drum voice, and we're going to take that up into our output here. This cable is not long enough. This one isn't going to be long enough either. Oh yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so when you have the knob all the way to the left, it mutes it. Okay, so that's good for performance because you can take your part out, turn it to the right, you add notes in. All right, so then let's get 2 channels of this going at once. So I'm going to take our other meta, I'm going to make it a drum, and then I'm going to patch the other channel into the trigger here. Okay, so fun stuff. It's got a reset input, so we can bring this around to a single pattern. So this is looping every 8 bars. If you've got a longer clock divider, like say a 16-step sequencer with like step 1 it'll like bring you around to the length of a bar. A 32-step sequencer with step 1 on, that'll give you a 2-bar pattern, right? So like that's how you kind of bring this thing into order. Like if I were to take the 4 output, you got how that loops and it goes back around on the 4th hit. basically has like a clock divider multiplier in it. So this one is like a 2 verse 3 polyrhythm. So it switches up the 2 and the 3 meters. Now, one thing that's kind of fun about this thing is it will follow your clock everywhere that it goes. So let's do a sort of bizarre modulating clock. So like now we have a clock that's being modulated, and it will follow it, and it'll kind of, it lags a little bit, but it lags in a sort of musical way. And so that's sort of the idea here, is like shove whatever clock you want into it, like patch these into envelopes, triggerable sources, do whatever you want. And then finally, one thing that this can do that's kind of like a non-traditional gate sequencer sort of function is it can actually like map the outputs onto CV. So let me try to get a situation where we can hear this a little bit better. I'm going to get rid of this channel. Make this more of like an oscillator. Okay, so I'm modulating the phaser with the analog output of the gate seek. And so what it does is it actually uses the 2 sequences to gate the A and the B channels. And so in this case, it makes sort of like a 3-stage like LFO. Now, what I could also do here is I could allow a modulation signal to pass or not, depending on where that's at. So now I've got sort of like an audio rate modulator here. And that's only being allowed to pass while the B channel is on. I'm going to get rid of the, so we can kind of hear this a little better. And so basically the idea here, I don't want to make this too confusing. Like, essentially you can use the 2 sequences to control the 2 analog channels of the VIA circuit, okay? And so with the gate mode, it will let signal through the channel when the sequencer is high, okay? So like when this LED is on, it'll let a signal through, and so like if you have an LFO patched through, you can like gate your LFO rhythmically, right? Or if you want to do this like a totally different way, what you can do is actually use those 2 gate audio sources. That's that tangle of patch cables that keeps giving me a heart attack. Alright, so we'll patch this through here. Okay, and then take an audio source, patch it through. So you can actually use it to gate audio through the module. it's all voltage controlled too. Okay, so that's just about all that I think we probably have patience for today. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Clearly, you know, next time I do a presentation, I'll do one module at a time. But thanks so much for checking it all out. Does anybody have any questions about particular things, or should we just talk afterwards? What are we thinking? Crickets? Let's talk after. Okay, good, good. So yeah, that's it.
Like when you jam on it.
What do you say?
What's it sound like when you jam on it?
Oh my God, put me on the spot.
You're about to get into one in a few minutes.
Yeah, I know. Maybe we'll. I can't do it right now, just on the spot. I'll have to like put it all together. So go look at the other cool synths, and I'll try to put together a patch that's fun to play. No, you're good. You're good. That's a good question. I'm just not ready for it.